Imagine this, 8:45 a.m., January 20th, 1953. The air is cold, 49 degrees, skies overcast. Outside the White House, a limousine sits. Inside, President Harry S. Truman watches. But President-elect Dwight David Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander of World War II, refuses to step out. He will not enter the White House as a guest, will not have coffee, will not follow tradition. He will sit and wait for the sitting president to come to him. This was no accident. This was a calculated insult, delivered on what should have been one of American democracy's most dignified moments. The peaceful transfer of power. Eisenhower, 62, a war hero and liberator of millions, had just won the presidency in a landslide. Yet he wouldn't walk 20 feet to greet the man who, just 7 years earlier, had offered to make him president on the Democratic ticket, with Truman himself stepping down to be vice president. Truman, 68, the farmer-turned-president who had dropped atomic bombs, confronted Stalin, rebuilt Europe with the Marshall Plan, and integrated the armed forces, had offered Eisenhower the highest office, not once, but twice. Eisenhower had refused, insisting he was a soldier, not a politician. Then, in 1952, Eisenhower ran for president as a Republican against Truman's party, against everything Truman had built. Now, he treated the outgoing president like a summoned servant. CBS correspondent Eric Severide captured the moment with 3 words. It was a shocking moment. Their relationship hadn't always been broken. Once, Truman called Eisenhower the greatest military mind of the age. But something had fractured, slowly, over years, transforming mutual respect into something close to hatred. The first offers appeared in 1945. Truman, new to the presidency after FDR's death, saw Eisenhower as America's future. He told the general, "There is nothing you may want that I won't try to help you get," including the presidency in 1948. Eisenhower, a career soldier, declined, citing no political ambitions. In 1947, Truman offered again. He even wrote in his private diary that he would gladly step aside and run as Eisenhower's vice president. Again, Eisenhower declined, happy in his role as president of Columbia University with no interest in politics. Then 1952 arrived. Eisenhower announced he would seek the Republican nomination. Truman felt personally betrayed. Eisenhower had repeatedly claimed no interest, turned down the presidency as a Democrat, and now he wanted it, but as a Republican against Truman. But the true break, beyond repair, came during the campaign, centering on George C. Marshall. Marshall was Eisenhower's mentor, the man who made his career possible. As Army Chief of Staff during World War II, Marshall promoted Eisenhower to lead D-Day. After the war, as Truman's Secretary of State, he created the Marshall Plan, rebuilding Europe and earning a Nobel Peace Prize. He later served as Truman's Secretary of Defense during the Korean War in 1950 and 1951. Senator Joseph McCarthy began attacking Marshall, baselessly accusing him of being part of a communist conspiracy. These accusations were absurd, grotesque. Senator William Jenner called Marshall a frontman for traitors. Truman was enraged. He called Marshall the greatest living American. These attacks felt personal, an attack on his administration, and Truman expected Eisenhower to defend his mentor. Eisenhower owed Marshall everything. In October 1952, Eisenhower was to speak in Milwaukee, McCarthy's home state. His staff prepared a paragraph defending Marshall, calling him dedicated with singular selflessness and profoundest patriotism. Reporters had the advanced text. But Wisconsin Republican leaders urged Eisenhower to remove it, fearing it would offend McCarthy and cost votes. Eisenhower, wanting to win, made the calculation. He deleted the paragraph. Winning, he decided, was more important than defending Marshall in that moment. On October 3rd, Eisenhower stood on stage with McCarthy. He praised McCarthy's anti-communist efforts, but said nothing about George Marshall. After the speech, McCarthy grabbed Eisenhower's hand, holding it high for the cameras. The photograph of Eisenhower shaking hands with the man who called his mentor a traitor went nationwide. The news was brutal. Reporters knew the defense had been cut. Truman's reaction was immediate. "I had never thought the man who is now the Republican candidate would stoop so low." He called Eisenhower just a coward. Truman made defending Marshall a central campaign theme, questioning Eisenhower's character. Eisenhower grew angry. seeing Truman's words as partisan attacks, not genuine concern. But for Truman, loyalty, character, and standing up for your people truly mattered. Adding to the insult, 2 weeks earlier, Eisenhower had campaigned with Senator William Jenner, who had called Marshall a frontman for traitors. Eisenhower knew what Jenner had said, but needing Indiana's votes, he stood beside him, accepted his embrace, and smiled. He later confessed to feeling dirty, but did it anyway. To Truman, this pattern was clear. Eisenhower would sacrifice principle and loyalty for political gain. If he couldn't stand up to McCarthy and Jenner, how could he stand up to the Soviets? Eisenhower won in a landslide. On November 18th, they met for a transition briefing. The atmosphere was stiff, formal, embarrassing. Truman tried to explain the presidency. Eisenhower listened with visible impatience, feeling his time was wasted. Truman felt Eisenhower wasn't listening, believing he already knew everything. Afterward, Truman predicted Eisenhower would struggle. He'll sit right here, and he'll say, "Do this, do that," and nothing will happen. Poor Ike. It won't be a bit like the Army. Then came Inauguration Day. Eisenhower remained in the limousine. Truman knew. Duty-bound, he swallowed his anger, walked out, and climbed into the car. The silence was heavy. Myra Eisenhower tried small talk. Then, Eisenhower broke the silence, asking who ordered his son, John, a major serving in combat in Korea, home for the inauguration. Truman looked at him and said, "I did," he explained. "The president thought it was right and proper for your son to witness the swearing in of his father to the presidency. It was a generous, thoughtful gesture from a man who, despite his anger, understood the moment's significance." Eisenhower said nothing in response. No thank you, no acknowledgement. He just looked out the window. Years later, he would send a thank you letter, but not in that car on that cold January morning. The uncomfortable ride ended at the Capitol. Eisenhower was sworn in. Truman left, skipping the parade, heading to Union Station where 5,000 cheering people saw him off to Independence, Missouri. He would not return to the White House for 10 years. Eisenhower did not invite him back. For 8 years, Truman never set foot in the White House. Invitations were seen as insincere. The two men lived in frozen hostility. Truman later said he could barely mention Eisenhower's name without profanity. In October 1959, George Marshall died. Eisenhower and Truman sat side by side at Marshall's funeral, silent. Still, no words were exchanged. Then, in November 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The nation mourned. Truman and Eisenhower, both in Washington for the funeral, rode in the same car to Arlington Cemetery. During the drive, they talked, discussing the assassination and the state of the world. After the graveside service, Margaret Truman invited the Eisenhowers to lunch at Blair House. They accepted. For an hour, Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower sat, talked, and reminisced. An aide recalled, "You'd think there had never been any differences between them. It was really wonderful." As they left, they stood on the sidewalk and talked a few more minutes, then shook hands. A long, lingering, silent handshake. 10 years after that cold January morning, they had finally found their way back to something resembling friendship. Dwight Eisenhower died in 1969. Harry Truman in 1972. The story of January 20th, 1953, became political legend. Eisenhower's refusal, Truman's walk, a symbol of how personal grievances can poison public duty. The insult was about betrayal. Eisenhower felt betrayed by Truman's campaign attacks. Truman felt betrayed by Eisenhower's abandonment of Marshall. Both men had grievances, but both let them override their responsibility to the moment. An inauguration is about the continuity of democratic government, showing institutions are stronger than individual pride. Eisenhower forgot that when he refused to walk through the door. Truman remembered it when he walked out anyway. The handshake in 1963 suggests they eventually understood what they had lost. But understanding came too late to change what happened. On that cold January morning, Dwight Eisenhower sat in a car and refused to enter Harry Truman's White House. The insult landed. The damage was done. For 10 years, Two of America's most important men stayed apart, divided by pride, anger, and a threshold neither would cross. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. It helps us share more untold stories from American history. Subscribe to stay connected with these historical accounts. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for watching and thank you for keeping these stories alive.